Ladies and gentlemen, ATDF everything in that shelf presentation. You're now rocking with TDF everything. Spoiled rotten.
Spoiler alert.
Welcome back, everybody.
Hey.
It's me, Daniel,
And this is Band
on Spoiled Rotten.
on that shelf.
Boom. Well, we're here finally.
Yep.
You probably were like, when is it happening? Actually, Ben has let me know that definitely people have been asking. We are going to be reviewing and spoiling Shang-Chi.
And the
Just
Legend
right
of
off
the
the
Ten
top.
Rings.
Yes, and
Yeah.
the Legend of the Ten Rings. Right off the top. I just had a baby. This is why we hadn't recorded anything. We still had episodes going out. But yeah, we're going to be doing What If when it's done. We're doing Shang-Chi now. I mean, the good news is if everything goes properly, we will have a Venom spoiler episode in time for Venom. So
yes.
it seems like things are back on track.
Well, it's babies are hard, so we wanted to really make sure that we can fully give Daniel all the congratulations, all the praise in the world, and all the time to get things right. So here we are today, long overdue, but yeah, I've definitely been very excited to record this episode. Let's get into it.
Yeah, let's do it. Well, I mean, I feel like this one's going to be different because I already have heard your thoughts of the movie.
You've heard a lot of my thoughts.
Yeah,
they've I think grown a lot too since then, hearing other people's opinions, but I don't know, I'm largely the same, but this is gonna be a very interesting thing because I want to hear your thoughts a lot more too.
Yeah, I think what I plan to do after hearing your thoughts was I will say what I think now, and then I will give you your space to say what you want to say, because obviously in this instance in particular, like my opinion is valid in so much as it's how I felt, but obviously you have more insight into it, and I don't want it to come off like this is some kind of like discussion to like prove you're right or something like that. I just want you to be able to voice what you have to say. But overall, yeah, I like the movie. I think in terms of and I say the same thing specifically about Black Panther, but I feel like people have kind of caught on to the fact that I'm applying it to most things that we review now. Like, what is the like one sentence or like one idea that is anchoring whatever we're engaging with? And for me, this movie Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings was able to get that right in terms of their one sentence or their one theme that they wanted to have everything fly off of, which to me came off as how to harness your passion. And throughout the movie, you see different people harnessing their passion for different reasons or not harnessing them until the end. And I really thought that each character gets a chance to show that in a negative or positive way, but it all made sense to me and it all came together in a very good way for me. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed that. I've actually seen it twice now, so it actually reaffirmed what I thought the second time around. And I know there's other things going on, there's other sub themes going on, but I feel like that was kind of the main push of the movie, and for me it succeeded in that. But yeah, I feel like people have seen like your Facebook posts and you said you've kind of changed some ideas, but I wanted to give you your chance to state without interruption kind of what you thought of the movie.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I have to state my biases, right? Because I mean, as a reviewer, as a content creator, and all that kind of stuff, I want to stay as neutral as possible. But this one was very, very hard for me to stay neutral on, just because it was very hard, I imagine, for you to not put expectations on Black Panther and all that kind of stuff, especially for how it delivered, right? So the thing for me was I expected this movie to give the Chinese audience the same level of detail and respect and writing and all that kind of stuff that came with Black Panther in many, many different ways. Now, the difference here being objectively that there's like Wakanda is a fictional history, but like the Chinese history is very, very real. So there's an element of this where it's just like I was really excited to see my own culture celebrated on screen, seeing how it could be adapted into the way Marvel has written its own history, so to speak, and all that kind of stuff. And the disappointment to me was the lack of finite detail that every other movie was, it is now the standard and bar for every other movie, but dropped the ball for Shang-Chi, in my opinion, because to me this movie had to answer the question for me: is Marvel allowing Asian males to go beyond the stereotyped meta that we've been allowed to be in Hollywood, and being the whole like you have to be the kung fu guy, your romanticism has to be very, very stoic and beaten and all that kind of stuff. There's toxic masculine and all like the story beats we'll talk about more throughout with the actual review of the movie. But to me, it was the idea of, can this break down barriers at a point in time where the pandemic has shown us so much Asian racism, has shown us so many different things, and this was truly the first movie of the Phase 4 MCU beyond the Thanos era. You know what I mean? So it was a first. There was a lot to do here, whether or not it worked. Um, I agree that there was a lot of good in the writing, but a lot of things around him, including the characters, made a lot more sense than he did. But to me, Shang-Chi did not make any sense in this movie. And it's disappointing to see that.
Why do you feel he didn't make sense?
So in this movie, the one thing that was really, really good, that the theme that I really, really enjoyed in this movie is duality, the constant aspect of the good, the bad, the yin and the yang, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is very, very much that, and the concepts of the yin and the yang being much more complicated than what I'm about to explain, but that not all evil is truly evil, and not all good is truly good. And this is definitely reflected really, really well within the father, Wenwu and Shang-Chi. It's written very, very well, except for the fact that at good, he just really goes from place to place to place and doesn't really have any involvement. He's kind of along for the ride, versus like Wenwu is like, yeah, okay, dominant throughout history, and I want to get to that later, but like 1,000-year rule, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of like evil there, and then you see him falling in love, you see that romanticism that played out very, very well in that everything that Wenwu did with the mother. But it was just, you don't see the same level of writing, and to me it feels like the movie, or rather Kevin Feige, wanted to apologize to the Marvel audience for doing the disservice to the Mandarin character, and wrote it like this. To me, all the writing, all the tension seemed to be handling that more than anything else. And it bothered me. It really, really, truly did. Like, all the writing for Wenwu was better. Shang-Chi's character didn't make sense. I'll say this right off the bat. For a character that's supposed to be based off Bruce Lee in the 60s and 70s, he takes a lot of inspiration from Jackie Chan.
I would not put that on the movie at all. That's the comic books, and none, like, you can ask anybody who loves these MCU movies or has watched these movies, they are not sticking to the letter about what they're doing in terms of taking the characters from the comic book to the movie.
Oh, I completely agree with that. And in this situation, it needed to be. But in a situation where, sorry to everyone, we had some technical difficulties, but I believe I was just in the middle of a discussion about like how the original character of Shang-Chi was based off Bruce Lee, but this version of Shang-Chi is based off Jackie Chan. And to me, that was done for comedic effect, which needs to happen for Marvel. But the biggest issue to me is like, okay, well, everyone reveres in the Chinese community Bruce Lee. What Bruce Lee means to the Chinese community is huge, not because of just because of the 4 movies and like he was an amazing martial artist and all that kind of stuff, but it's the way he adapted Chinese culture into North America and grew it and got it popular. And he was a true advocate for this. He wanted people to know about Kung Fu, wanted people to know about culture. So he did a lot for Chinese culture. And it stays the sticking point with a lot of genuine people in like hardcore. Like I say, the OG Asians are like, why is he going out telling everyone like the Chinese secrets? And then like there are people like me that are like, yeah, I like the fact that he's normalizing what Asians are, or like demystifying for whatever purpose of how we're seen in the mythos of like the North American lens. But the challenge to me is then you adapt it for Jackie Chan, which is, a significant figure, but doesn't mean nearly as much to both martial arts, but also to the Chinese audiences. Like it's unanimously Bruce Lee. Like I was so confused watching this. I was like, why is this Jackie Chan and everything Jackie Chan? Like that's entertaining, and I guess that's what people liked. But it was weird to me that it was like, why not really take the good part of the inspiration for the original part of the character and run with that, as opposed to just like, let's redo the part that was really, really good that I was looking forward to. The inspiration from the Bruce Lee side of things, where he's constantly like being pushed down and has to fight through everything. I'm like, that I like that so much more. This is him literally. I don't even know if I like this character of Shang-Chi. The way they wrote him and all that kind of stuff, because he seems to run away from responsibility a lot. Doesn't really make a lot of decisions, or is put in situations where he's not allowed to make a lot of decisions. It just goes from scene to scene to scene. It's just a real challenge there in that Bruce Lee aspect, because you're right. Marvel stuff is taking the original source and drawing new inspirations.
MCU
but to me, I'm
stuff,
like,
yeah.
MCU stuff. But to me, I'm like, why is it not a hybrid fix of like Chow Yun Fat, as well as Bruce Lee, as well as Jet Li, as well as Jackie Chan, like elements of all those huge action stars and all that kind of stuff. And there's many, many more like Donnie Yen. Why that? Like, it was weird to me.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to that. I feel like Black Panther, there needs to be room to allow for what do the storytellers want, like what is
Mhm.
meaningful to the storytellers, and to
Mhm.
not look at this like it can only be that, or else it doesn't work.
Mhm.
It doesn't work for you. That's perfectly valid.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Mhm.
what you've said resonates with a bunch of people, but maybe
Yeah.
Destin Daniel Cretton was like, I like Jackie Chan. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe that's the decision that's made. I know they used Jackie Chan's like stunt team as well.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just
Cinematography
as simple.
team and all that kind of stuff
Maybe it
too
was
was
just as
used.
simple as that. Well, I think the
Yeah.
cinematographer is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but like
Right.
I think for the stunt team they were using Jackie Chan's people, and I
Mhm.
think cinematically, and we're talking about North American,
Mhm.
there is more to go from on the Jackie Chan stuff in terms of,
Mhm.
as we said, the very practical thing of maybe there isn't a Bruce Lee stunt team intact still. Maybe
Mhm.
it's just Jackie Chan. Um, you spoke about Donnie Yen. Yeah, maybe that
Mhm.
was a choice. They just decided they were gonna not go that way. And again, I think for me, a lot of what you're talking about is completely valid, but it
Mhm.
also what I like about Black Panther, which I do think is a better movie, so I'm not trying to be like, hey, just enjoy it. It's the same thing.
Yes.
I
Mhm.
think what works in Black Panther that also works in here is that it's allowing for a diaspora and not just a this is the only way
Mhm.
things can be. I think it is very specifically showing you like this is, I mean, Black Panther is all about like, hey, you can't just be like this is the way it works.
Mhm.
That's not what they're doing here, but I think it's the same thing that works well, is that to tie yourself up in this is what it means to be Chinese, or this is what it means to be East Asian, that can only go so far as how you experience the world. That you can't make that universal to everybody else,
Right.
right? And so what I would, and so that was one thing. But I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying that is completely valid, that that's how you felt, and it doesn't mean you have to like the movie more because this is how I feel. The other thing I think is interesting is that what I like about the movie is that Shang-Chi doesn't come ready to to play. That the whole point of the movie is he's not harnessing his passion. So the events of the movie are forcing him to do that. So when you say he's like running away from responsibility, yeah, that's not a flaw. That is a key aspect. Again, you don't have to like it, but what I'm saying is that's what I like about the movie is that we see a marked change at the end of the events from what he's like at the beginning to the end. I actually see a character, and what I like about it is it's not like, and we've by this point people have heard us talk about Iron Man and Hulk and Iron Man 2. It's not an arc that gets completed by the end of the first act and then you're just kind of like, I guess we're just watching him change. Rather, it actually feels like a bunch of, and it's what I like about Black Panther as well, is that the lead character, a lot of people say is passive, but realistically, what T'Challa is doing is collecting information so he can make a change that actually matters at the end of the movie. Yes. Which he does. He doesn't just put the bad guy in jail. He actually fundamentally changes the way his nation operates and how that affects the rest of the world. And at the end of this movie, you could argue that it's not a change that Shang-Chi change or makes, but I do think it is. He has been put to the point where he is actually meaningfully standing up to his father, but also working within his family again. He's not running away from responsibility. He's stepping up and connecting with his sister and with Katie, which we will talk later about, forming a bond that actually will be used for good moving forward instead of just hanging out and wasting their abilities.
Oh, I get what you're saying. I really, really do. There's just, I'm hoping that scene by scene by scene, you can get a little bit more of what I'm putting down here, because I feel like in many ways you said something there that I lost the paraphrasing for, or the phrasing for, but you said something that it breaks the mold in a certain way. And I'm like, okay, it does break the mold.
No, I never said that.
Okay.
No.
But there was some like beat there where it's like different in a certain way. But I'm like, the only thing that I feel Shang-Chi does differently is that this hero, or the protagonist, I should say, you can see like there's fundamental parts where you're like, wait, what? That came as a shock. Like, you did what as a kid? You actually went through with it. It was like, okay, so you're not truly all good. And then like there's all these different things that you're like, okay, so you're running away from responsibility. You actually followed through with the assassination. You like ditched your younger daughter, your younger sister, knowingly. Like, you like it. This is a shitty, like a guy that's made a lot of shitty decisions. And I'm like, there's a lot here that I'm like, by the time he's like, okay, I got to kill my father, you're like, what the hell? Where did that come from? None of it made sense, because it's just like you had all this time to develop, and then you just like get to that one point and so much happens and so rushed, and you're like, well, what the hell? Like, why wasn't that more significant earlier on? Why wasn't anything a buildup? That was just such a rushed conclusion. But it just, to me, a check mark of like, yep, okay, this is what he needs to do. He needs to realize that with the help of another person. And I'm just
I didn't see it as he was like all of a sudden, okay, now I need to kill my dad. What I saw was the whole movie, as you said at the beginning, it's about yin and yang. For me, it's not about that, but I see what you're saying in terms of
the dualities.
The duality and keeping that itself. And so obviously for Shang-Chi, the duality is his mom's influence, his dad's influence. And for a lot of the movie, he's decided, I'm going to push everything out. And that's why you see him do to also, was he like 16, 17, and you're like giving him shit about running away because he's scared, but
about leaving his younger daughter, his sister behind. 100%.
It's not his daughter, it's his
not
sister,
his daughter,
and
his
like
younger sister. But 100%, like, in that situation where he's already seeing how his dad
that's putting a lot on a teenager who hasn't actually been able to.
No,
I mean, that's your personal take. What I'm saying is, realistically, you're forcing the kid in the situation to be the adult. That's fine if that's what you want to do, but it doesn't really make sense to me. What I would say is so he has pushed that all aside, and then the events of the movie force him to reckon with the fact that he's got his mom and his dad inside of him, and it's his dad's side that's like, I have to kill him. And it's by the time he gets to the actual showdown and has had time with his aunt, he has now incorporated his mom's influence from him, and it's not he isn't killing his dad. His dad actually just gives up, not gives up. His dad settles it for both of them by being like, all right, I'm not going to do this, and I'm gonna let the soul sucker take me.
Disagree. Disagree
Why?
entirely. Because okay, by the time they get to the village, Talo,
Mhm.
Michelle Yeoh has already trained Shang-Chi to use Tai Chi. And that's a part that sucked to me. I'm like,
You're
oh,
talking
so
about
they're
by the time when Wu gets there.
yes, he's fully trained already in Tai Chi. And the thing that's nonsense about that is like, okay, first and foremost, they should have just called it Tai Chi. And they refused to do so because they're like, oh, like audiences would have been like, Tai Chi, isn't that the thing that old Asian women do in the park at 5 a.m. in the morning? And like that would have been a joke. So they refused to call it Tai Chi. And that pissed me off because I was like, why aren't you calling the martial arts name? It's a weird thing to do.
Well, I saw it as
And
that's what influenced Tai Chi, but again, you're talking not about a Chinese cult. You're talking about a mystical from a different dimension place.
yeah,
And
we're
so
talking about
they'll
Ta
say
Lo,
this.
which itself, I just swallowed the bullet on Ta Lo. I'm not gonna complain too much about that because I do recognize it's a pocket dimension. It can be as ridiculous as it wants to be.
Yeah.
I
So
get
what
that.
I'm saying is the same way that people acknowledge that Asgard influenced like Norse culture, and you can
Mm-hmm.
see how different things in Wakanda have permeated. That's how I see Ta Lo. So yeah, I
No,
wouldn't be
I
like,
don't.
oh, it's
Yeah,
specifically Tai Chi.
I no, I okay. But the thing is, it is Tai Chi. If
If
every
that's how you want to take it, sure. I
but
don't see it that way.
okay, so let's put it this way: it's Tai Chi. She teaches him Tai Chi, how to redirect energy, how to go towards all that kind of stuff. Those are all elements of Tai Chi. Like
Mhm.
genuinely, they are. So she teaches him Tai Chi. Great. So his mother's influence is already in him by the time he has that discussion with Aquafina. So it's just like in that situation, you're just like, okay, you've been taught to be soft, and then not in the final fight, you refuse to actually use any of the Tai Chi until you get beaten down, and then you're like, oh right, I need to open up my fist and redirect energy as opposed to be the force of energy. And I'm
Mhm.
just like, okay, that's really stupid because you just learned that like you just went to Michelle Yeoh and was like, teach me how to do this. Spends the whole day teaching you, and then nothing. You're just like, oh, the thing I was taught to do immediately. Yeah, let's abandon that and just go back to what my dad taught me how to do, which is
So would you
wushu,
would
which is
you
bullshit.
allow for the fact that one day of training wouldn't really be something that sticks with you in the heat of the moment, and you might be a little bit more passionate about seeing your dad actually being confronted with and reverting to what you know, which is
What I'm
the stuff
saying
that your
is the
dad is.
first. What I'm saying is the first pose that he did
Mhm.
was Wing Chun already. Like what was just what his dad used. The first
Yeah,
pose,
that's
the
what I'm
first
saying. We're
stance, the
saying the
first
same
everything.
thing, that he
It's
he reverted to what he knew, and then throughout the course of the fight was like, I have to switch it up.
but if he was such an advocate, as such a like connected with his mother
But
and
he wasn't.
Talo
That's the
and the
whole point.
village,
That's the whole
it
point.
just so you're saying he resisted there. You're saying he just like
I don't
Michelle
think
Yeoh,
it's
teach me.
resisting. I think you're thinking about this like he's some robot and you uploaded a new software and that's what he's going to do.
Disagree
Whereas,
entirely.
okay, well,
Disagree
how would you
entirely.
describe it then?
Because
Because what I'm
okay,
saying is he is a
what I'm
human
saying,
being. He saw
okay,
his dad, he got emotional and reverted to something and forgot what he just was learned for over the course of maybe 24 hours versus how many ever years he was training in the other stuff.
the Wing Chun.
Yeah,
Yeah, I completely I don't agree with that because I'm like, if you were taught a
that's
brand new
fair.
thing and you knew that was the only way to defeat him, that was the only way, and getting to that village, learning that martial art was the only way, and you're doing the thing that didn't work in the first place. Why? Like it's so stupid to me. Why? Like at
Okay.
least here's the thing. During the fight, what I'm saying is at the beginning of the fight, Tai Chi should have been used, and if it wasn't successful, and he then had that memory of his mother or something like that, and that made him connect with it, then I'm actually a lot more okay with that than
Okay.
anything else. But the difficulty is like, okay, you went into the fight with Wing Chun and you tried to overpower him, and then you're like, oh right, yeah, I can't do this. So it's him being hard-headed over and over and over
Mhm.
again.
Yep.
So to me, I'm like, that's dumb. Like you
Okay.
haven't actually learned anything. It's inconsistent to me. That's a small little detail that I'm like,
Well,
that's really dumb
let's
to
just
me.
disagree that it's inconsistent and
Mhm.
more just complex
I
than
will,
more
yeah,
complex than what you're allowing for the movie.
yeah. And here's another thing I will say about this. If Shang-Chi is supposed to be such a great fighter, why does he only know one type of martial art?
I think
That
that's
bothered me so much throughout the
I
whole
don't
movie. Is
think
like
that
he's
that
supposed to be this great fighter.
translates. I don't know if that translates to an audience member like me that he only knows one type. I know that he learns
Yeah.
another type throughout the
Mhm.
movie, but I don't. To me, it never looks like he only knows the one thing.
Well, see, that was the thing. And this is what I'm talking about in the level of detail that other movies get. This movie didn't get the same level of detail
But
because it's like,
what do you mean by other level of detail that other movies get? I'd
so
like you to be specific because I feel like you're trying to like hint at Black Panther, which to me similarly dilutes things to make it
it
more palatable
does.
for everyone.
It
So
does. But
what do you mean then?
there's so many elements of like dialogue detail that in Captain Marvel, for example, is like, oh, okay, they're really just definitely making a point of like, oh, they're playing up this character really, really well, the misogyny and all this kind of stuff, and they're playing her character really, really well, and it made sense, right? There's so much inconsistencies here where I'm like, he's supposed to be the greatest martial arts combat person, and he's supposed to be this, but he only knows one type of kung fu. Like that is ridiculous. And this is what I mean that it should have been inspired by Bruce Lee because Jeet Kune Do, if he did Jeet Kune Do, it would have made sense conceptually because it would have been I'm picking and choosing the best of every martial art and turning it into this killer martial art, which is exactly what Jeet Kune Do was supposed to be. So that would have made more sense for Shang-Chi if Shang-Chi was using one type of martial art the entire movie. That would have made sense. It's like the hybrid, most deadly parts of every martial art in Shang-Chi. If we were to be like, okay, your father trained you, Death Dealer trained you, which Death Dealer was a throwaway, by the way.
Why
All
do you
this kind
think
of
Death
stuff.
Dealer's a throwaway?
Well, I mean,
Like, what do
just
you know
because
about Death Dealer
I
before
don't
you
know
saw this?
anything. I
Exactly.
just thought it was cool. Like I didn't care
Okay,
about
so
him,
then
but
what's
I'm
he a
just like,
throwaway for?
no, to make him look so important in the actual promotional material, and then be like, oh, okay,
I
he
didn't
just
think
gets
he was
sucked
that
up by a Death
important. He
Dealer.
just looked striking, but I don't understand how that's a throwaway.
I don't know. It was
You
just
didn't know about him ahead of time.
I didn't know a lot about this because of the fact that I didn't want to know. I didn't want.
But what I
The
mean
issue
is
I
it's
didn't
not
want to
like you're
know
like,
how
hey,
white
they didn't
people
do the one
see
thing we
Asian
know
culture.
Death Dealer does.
What do you mean? Train Shang-Chi?
No, but what I'm saying is you're saying he was throwaway, but I'm like, it would only make sense he's throwaway if you were like, hey, he didn't do the one thing we all know Death Dealer does. But since we don't know what Death Dealer
Okay,
is,
that's
I don't
fair.
know how it's a throwaway.
Okay, that's a valid point. It'd be like if Ant-Man didn't get small, then that's
Yes.
a throwaway. I completely get that. It's like you have Hank Pym in a movie, but he doesn't get small. I get that. That's fair. That's valid. But I don't know. It's just there's so many elements of this. I'm like, that didn't make sense. I don't get it. I feel like yeah, it just made more sense to me that I'm like, if the most lethal killer in the world would have a hybrid selection of kung fu's and martial arts of like karate,
Yeah.
judo,
I mean,
all that
I
kind of
don't
stuff, as
think
opposed to just one, as
at no
opposed to
point,
just one.
I will say this, at no point is the movie making me feel like Shang-Chi is the most skilled killer in the world. At no point, I don't even know if they say that he is. Like, it wouldn't make sense if they said that he was. He says he was trained in a bunch of ways to kill a person, but we also know he's decided to abandon that.
But after he did it,
He killed one person, yes.
yes,
And then
and then
how does that make him the
and
most
then
lethal person?
I'm not saying that this is the promotional
But
material, man.
no,
This is
it's not
literally
the promotional material.
It
It's
is.
you're saying this, and I'm like, I've never saw your. You can't say you're not saying it because your whole
I
argument
am
is
saying
based
it.
on this.
I
But
am
what?
saying it.
Yeah, but the promotional material never said he's the most skilled killer. What you're going off of is what you know of Shang-Chi from the comics, which is best martial artist. Fair enough. But
Yep,
at no point does this movie say that.
you're right.
And at no point
Mhm.
do I feel like the movie is even trying to imply it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But I mean, let's be perfectly honest here. Don't you think it makes more sense for him to know just more than one type of kung fu?
I will say this: you're giving me this information now that he only knows one type.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that, and it didn't seem like he was put at a disadvantage throughout the movie, other than he needs to take on someone who's lived for 1,000 years, and he needed to switch up his style.
He barely won a fight up until the final fight, though. He was disadvantaged the entire time through. He lost the bus fight. He lost the cage fight with his sister. Now, granted, he was never going to win. He was never going to win that. But like every fight he gets involved in, he like the Death Dealer fight. If that didn't
makes sense to me that he wouldn't win that fight.
Yeah, but I'm like, didn't win every single time. I'm like, oh, sucks.
Did he lose the bus fight, or he just lost his pendant?
Well, that was the whole purpose, is to protect the pendant during the bus fight, right? So if he lost the pendant and the people got separated, then I would say he lost. If the main objective, I didn't see that as a loss.
I mean, I get that he wants to protect it, but to me, keeping your life and keeping the people on the bus safe is the win.
Okay, that's one way of putting it.
And then the scaffolding fight, I don't think he lost. But yes, he lost the Death Dealer one, and I think even more important than the Death Dealer one is that he lost to his sister, because I think that was how her story arc made sense to me, in terms of she didn't get the benefit of people actually investing and helping to train her, and she was pretty much able to keep up. So it makes sense to me that like her potential would exceed his, and then she would be able to beat him in a fight. So yeah, exactly. That makes sense.
Yep.
But other than that, fair enough if you think he lost every fight. I don't. But for me, even if you see it that way, I still think that makes sense for the story they're telling about this directionless person who hasn't harnessed his passion yet.
I mean, I get that. Like the movie works for what it's trying to do. My thing is, I'm frustrated what the movie tried to do. That's ultimately that's fair. It.
That's like, why I was saying, like, it's important for you to say it. It's important for you to have.
I'm trying to be very objective about this, but to me, the frustrating part is like what the movie was trying to do in the first place was not great, and that's what's frustrating to me. Is like everyone's like, "Oh, I love it, we love it, we love it," and then I'm like, "Yeah, it had an agenda." And to me, I'm like, it just reinforced a lot of the sandbox limitations of what Asian male characters could do. That, like, and once we get to the Awkwafina stuff, I know you're gonna push back heavily on, but I really hate it. I really hate it so bad.
Yeah. Let's get to it then.
Yeah. So, Awkwafina's character and Shang-Chi having that platonic relationship throughout the whole movie. That, I don't know how to feel about that, to be perfectly honest. I was completely fine with it. But at the same time, a big gut instinct was like, they're going to put them together by the end of the movie inexplicably. And the thing I hated most about it was because I'm like, oh, it's because he took his shirt off and he was attractive that she started seeing him that way. Or I don't know, they trauma bonded throughout the entire thing. But either way, I'm just like, this doesn't seem healthy. This doesn't seem good. It's weird how people would just deny their feelings for each other for like years and years and years and years, and then all of a sudden, like they'll be like, yeah, we're together. But
I don't think that's weird. That's like the story of my parents. Like,
okay,
I see that. I see what you're saying. If you're looking at this through the lens of, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, so please tell me if I'm wrong. If you are saying that like that wouldn't work in Asian culture, fair enough. But to me, if you are talking about breaking molds and stuff, then maybe more normalizing these two Asian presenting characters as having a more North American relationship, which, as I said, that's my parents who weren't even born here in Canada. They were born in Guyana. Literally, my mom was at the hospital, like was brought to the hospital when my dad was born. My dad has never really known a world where my mom didn't exist. They didn't get together until their 20s, but they were together all that time. And so, yes, it did take a bit of my mom being like, oh, wait, no, like, I do like him. Like, he's always been around. He's always there. Like, and I'm not saying this is one-to-one how it works in Shang-Chi, but what I'm saying is, they're showing you a relationship where it's two friends who are to me, it makes sense. I've heard the director say otherwise, so I could be way off, but it didn't really make sense what the director was saying based on what I've seen, especially now that I've seen it twice. in terms of it was a story showing you two friends that real like will ultimately realize they're more than friends, even despite what they're saying. But
Mhm.
again, that is my parents' story, and they can't be it can't be that those are the only two stories that work like that.
No, you're absolutely right. It can't be like that, but I'm just like, for it to be like, for her to like really just behave differently after she sees him with his shirt off is
What
just
that's like
kind
a
of like,
momentary thing, to be clear. Like, and I
I get
think
that.
that's like and as I said when you brought it up, that's also what happens in Thor. Like that seems more like a Marvel beat than trying to make any kind of point of like,
Yeah.
oh, the female protagonist swoons when the lead like happens in Captain America First Avenger, happens in Thor the first one. Like the woman swoons when the hero takes off his shirt. That seems like a Marvel beat more than
Mhm.
something they're trying to prove.
I get that. And I'm just kind of over it in this situation because
Yeah.
it was just like, I'm over that. I'm like, okay, can we write the love story? Because you're right though. Like two friends, like people that like ignore. Because I get that, and I've been in many situations like that where you're like in the friendship where you're like, okay, do we do this? Do we not? If we do this, are we going to lose our friendship? Is that too valuable? All that kind of stuff that could have been explored a little bit better. I feel, but it was just like, oh, he took his shirt off. He's got a six pack. All right, I can get down, and I'm like, that sucked a little bit, but because there was no real love story written there. The real love
Oh,
story
I
was written
disagree
between,
100%. I think
okay,
the whole thing though, where they're showing you, and it mostly is through fight scenes, but like even if you listen to the story of how they met, the only time they actually kick into action or are effective is if one of them is in trouble. They care
yep,
about each other, and that is they are passionate about each other. They
mhm,
are happy to fritter away life because they're together at their job. They I know you'll probably have other issues with the bus scene, but like he is still pretending like, oh, I don't know what's going on here. I don't want any trouble until they face smush
mhm,
Katie's face. Then he kicks into gear.
yep,
She's not really good. I mean, I don't know why they decided to just throw in the bow and arrow, but like it's her being like, I have to save Shang-Chi that gets
yep,
her to get the arrow. Like that is that. And then so all of that happens, and then look at their body language after those scenes when
mhm,
they're talking to their married couple friends, like the way they're holding each other's hands, the way they're resting on each other. To me, like, yeah, that's not an explicitly like, ooh, hot, they're gonna go fuck later. That was these are two people that genuinely care for each other and love each other.
yep,
And I thought that was way more meaningful, that they were able to loop all that stuff back in and then still give you the visual. So yeah, the swooning is whatever to me. Like again, it's
mhm.
a Marvel beat, but what I'm saying is there's so much more other than just the swooning when he takes his shirt off.
I completely agree that there's much more, and I actually like everything that you say because you're right. At the end of the day, it's like when they're kids and he was getting bullied and everything like that, and she stepped in to protect him, and then he steps in to protect her. I love the idea of like, okay, you can lie to each other and lie to everyone else about like who you are to each other. It's like, oh, we're just friends, like grandma, we're just friends. But at the end of the day, you would do anything to protect each other, and I loved that. I
And also
genuinely
on
love
the
that.
scaffolding fight, that's
Yes.
what kicks him into gear.
Yes.
He's not doing so great, and then Katie's in trouble. He starts moving with purpose and getting the job done.
100%. Yeah, he there's some movement in his step and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So I actually liked that part that they're like resisting. But the idea that there was no like exploration of his perspective of it, it only seemed like, he just was longing for a mother figure, right? It seemed
Oh,
like to
I don't
me,
understand how it's he longing for a mother figure, unless you're just talking about how he was hanging out with her family. But that's not on
mm,
his feelings for Katie. That's his feelings for Katie's mom and grandmother.
right. But and that's what I don't know. But it just to me,
Well, what
it
I
wasn't so successful in the writing. But I do like
so what I
what they were
like that
trying to
it
do,
was
though.
it's something that actually forces you to lean in. It's not explicit.
Mhm.
It's not what people usually ding Marvel for,
Yeah.
which is hitting you over the head with what they're doing. I thought it was very well. um I think that was good writing because it's
Mhm.
not just dialogue telling you, "Oh, we love each other, but we'll
Yes.
never tell you." I think that's pay attention to the movie, you'll see how
Mhm.
they feel about each other.
Yes. So I agree that there's good writing, but then the visual elements are where the limitations are, and that's where the frustrating
But
thing
what
is.
I'm saying is
For
it does come
any,
down to the visuals of
sure,
visually seeing how they kick into gear when they need to help each other, and then at the end how much closer and nurturing they look in comparison to a married couple.
okay,
If you
yes,
dissect that scene again.
I get that, but the thing, the aspect here is okay. I after the fight, after the final fight, I'm expecting a kiss there.
Yeah,
I'm just
I
expecting it, and the
we
fact that it
talked
was
about this
just
too, right? Like
wait,
it's the exact
yeah,
same beat as in Iron Man that like he doesn't kiss Pepper Potts at the end of that. They just hug each other the same way.
yeah, but in a
Katie and
movie where he's already had like a one night stand with a woman,
so those are
it's
two separate things to me. If you're talking
I
about
get
just
that.
him being sexual, sure, he's not sexual in this. But if you're talking about a meaningful relationship, I
Yes.
think it's done better actually than the first Iron Man in this because it feels way more integral to the point of what the movie is about instead of just, oh, and this is the romantic stuff.
Oh yeah, I agree with that 100%. But what I'm saying with that is that in a movie like Iron Man, where they're like, okay, there he had a one night stand, that was a scene, and then with Leslie Bibb's character, and then the human connection that he has with Pepper Potts, and the realization that he's like really, really into her. At that point, that makes more sense to me in that moment because it's just like, okay, you're a person that doesn't care about sex or like that kind of stuff or the physical element of it, but like you need the human connection there. And I'm less like, okay, this just bypassed all of that. It's just the frustrating thing for me was like, okay, we can objectify him, but we won't let him kiss his love interest. That's like on screen, and it was just a weird thing. It's so weird. I'm like, okay, you guys forced a hug after almost dying, and after that whole battle, it was a hug,
I
not a
mean,
kiss.
I know I said I was just gonna let you talk, but it seems like you're trying to force something because if we're talking about
I'm
your
expecting it.
frustrations
You're
with
absolutely right. I'm
if
expecting it.
so I wouldn't say they forced a hug. To me, the hug makes sense. And to me, the hug was way more meaningful. If you, again, the visuals of it, you're thinking about the concept of it. The visual of that hug was a very intimate and meaningful hug.
I get
And
that.
I think so. What you're saying is you would rather a kiss. But if
Yes.
we are talking about tracking this to its logical conclusion, like, yeah, he doesn't kiss Pepper Potts at the end of Iron Man 1, but then by Endgame, they've got a kid together, they're married. We know that the Marvel universe, the MCU, isn't just one-offs, right? Like,
Mhm.
it, there needs to be room for this to grow, and I don't think that rushing to a kiss at the end of the movie, when we already saw what they have in terms of an actual meaningful connection, does it service.
Okay. I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree there because in my situation, like the way I look at this is in any other movie, the audience is expecting a kiss, that
But I'm
romantic
giving you an
payoff,
example where they
that
don't get
visual
a kiss,
payoff.
and it still
You're
means
right.
something.
You're right. But in that example, I'm telling you, like it when a character has been, it's that hug, that connection that you're talking about in movie beats. It's always more meaningful when the I guess the protagonist or whoever or one of the characters is like, yeah, I don't care about sex or I just give it away or whatever, but the human connection is more important. In this situation, that's not that. It's just like he wasn't given anything. And it was just like he had human connection the entire time, and then it turned romantic. But then by the end of it, you're less like, well, is that romantic? Like you guys are just linking arms, not even holding hands. Like it's just like the hug was the closest you got to anything that was, but you know what I mean? Like the
I
visual
don't know what you
payoff.
mean. I'll be
I
honest with you. I feel like what you're grappling with in your head is, yeah, there's the sexual stuff that you wanted to see from an Asian male lead mixed in with the feelings you have about actually portraying a meaningful relationship between Katie and Shang-Chi. And I don't think that you're wrong to feel this way. I just
yep.
think that in terms of the story, that made sense to me.
I'm not saying it doesn't make sense, but to me, I'm like, okay, again, that was the sandbox and the agenda I wanted to serve. Like within this limitation, we want to write these movies, right? And it was just, it was frustrating because I'm like, of course, of course, of course. here's the beats, here are the beats, here are the beats. And it was just frustrating for me to see from movies, from a studio that's trying purposefully to push forward the envelope in regards to what people of color can do on screen. This is a movie that cements what Asian men can do on screen. And that's what's really, really bothersome to me. It's like every other movie is trying to advance something. This movie does not. This one movie's just like, all right, phase 4 of the MCU's here. Here's the first kickoff of it. Here's some Easter eggs to look out for. Here's some stuff to whatever. But it just it gets to be a cluster. It's a cluster of a mess to me of a movie, because I'm just like, it doesn't pay attention to Shang-Chi's character well enough, and pays a lot of attention to Wenwu. I
disagree with that 100%. I think that Shang-Chi, it's important that he is written the way he's written in this, and I don't mean that to cement what Asian males are. I mean, I'm just thinking if we take ethnicity out of it, his story is important, and I disagree that he's along for the ride. He is pushing action when he needs to, and then other times when they're trying to make a point in terms of how in over his head he is, he's not pushing the action anymore because he's in over his head. But I do think that in terms of a lead character, his journey was way more meaningful to me the way it was written. It wasn't just some guy that already knew what he was doing. Like, they avoided the issue that I have with Thor, which is like, well, the only interesting way to do this is to like set him back a few steps. It was actually getting to watch him learn. And again, it's what I like about that first bit of Iron Man, is you're actually watching him put together the pieces. It might be going too slow for you, which is perfectly fine, but I actually liked that it was better that he finished his arc at the end of the movie as opposed to at the end of the first act.
So here's my question: when you say he's doing things, the funny thing is, like, the asterisk you put on there is when he's needed to do something, right? Literally everything else, he's like along for the ride. It's just like,
that is his character. I'm not looking at that as a flaw. That's his character. He is someone that wants. He is someone that got a lot was put on him right away, and he's desperately trying to not have that kind of responsibility again.
Oh, that was one beat that really, really spoke to me. I'm like, what? Asian males getting too much responsibility expectations and running away from it. I'm all about that. Like that. So that was well written. Like, I really appreciate that part. Like, when he was like, did basically his Rumspringa in San Fran, and like, did all that kind of stuff. I'm like, that resonates with me so hard. I know exactly what that's about, but we can't have the movie be entirely about that. So I really appreciate the fact that,
why not?
Here's who he is. What's that? The whole movie be about him running away from his responsibilities?
I mean, the movie is about that, but why can't it be that?
Why can't it be him just in San Fran having his Rumspringa?
No, you keep changing your wording. Movie. What your initial wording was is it can't just be about him running away from responsibility.
Because he's got to embrace responsibility at some point.
Yeah, but if the movie being about that doesn't mean that he ends still running away from responsibility.
No, you're right. He embraces it. He ultimately does. He takes up the 10 rings. He does all that kind of stuff. He does the final fight. He takes the responsibility by the end of the movie. You're absolutely right. But I would have liked to see some small increments of that buildup. But either way, it is what it is. Like, to me, the idea of like, okay, he's going from here to here to here to here to here. Like, none of that is like when his decision to be like, hey, I have to go to China.
Only go to 3 places.
Yeah, we have to go to Macau, Moon, and then they're like,
okay, he gets the card from his sister, and he's like, and Katie, this is my chance to make better.
Yeah, and Katie immediately is like, no, you're not going alone. I got to come with you. And he doesn't do it or say anything, doesn't protest at all. Maybe because he wants her along for the ride. Maybe because like, oh, great. Yeah, now I've got my best friend coming with me. I won't be lonely or whatever, because this guy obviously doesn't want to be lonely, right? He's always surrounding himself with people and all that kind of stuff. So especially for someone that ran away.
They get taken away by Wenwu.
Yep.
And then they're like, oh, this is how we stop Wenwu. So he goes. So it's only, for me, that's only one beat where he's not in control of what's happening.
I saw it very, very differently.
Okay. Anyways. It would be good if you would explain how come you see it different, because I don't see how it's different.
Because I'm losing the details in the discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, I think sure. But I know you did have like thoughts on Wenwu and how he should have been,
Wenwu,
yeah, how he should have
yeah.
been portrayed.
So here's my biggest issue. As good as the writing for Wenwu's character, and as amazing as the acting is, and this to me is like the best part of this movie, I genuinely think that Wenwu's character is probably tied with Thanos as being like the best villain in the MCU from a purely writing standpoint. Like, you understand his motivations, you understand his logic, you understand a lot of different things. They do a lot of good there. And I love Wenwu's character. To me, like, the whole movie should have been called Wenwu and the Legend of the Ten Rings. But they write his character well, but not his backstory. Like, to me, one of the biggest issues is when you have this dominant character ruling history for 1,000 years, not ever be a part of the MCU in terms of discussion or impact or whatever. It's really, really, really odd to me, in the sense where, okay, sure, they make the idea of like, okay, we can write this Mandarin side story thing by giving him a love interest, and that love interest we take, like, that part of it was handled really, really well. But to me, I'm like, he was ruling for 1,000 years, and none of that was ever relevant at all, and throughout history, throughout the MCU, through all that kind of stuff. So it's a very, very weird thing. And then to me, I'm like, in that backstory, it seemed to me that there was a great opportunity to write it slightly differently, to incorporate actual Chinese history in, and to just kind of like make it kind of a little bit cooler. So my idea was that, like, Wen Wu was from the Xiu dynasty, which is like historians and like a lot of Chinese people recognize as the worst dynasty of all. It was the most corrupt, where like the emperor was just stealing land from farmers to develop infrastructure and just build buildings in the name of vanity and all that kind of stuff. So like people hated him and all that kind of stuff. So I had the idea of like, why not make Wen Wu one of the generals of his army, and that those vanity projects were him secretly looking for the 10 rings to try to get power, to try to like rule all of China, rule all of whatever. And then Wen Wu finds it and then kills the emperor, but then the people, the army, like are like, hey, you killed the emperor, we defeat you because you don't know how to use the 10 rings yet, and then we put you in this sarcophagus coffin thing, which is how the Chinese used to bury their emperors. They used to be like, hey, you're about to die soon, so we're putting you in this sealed tomb with two, like, I guess, enslaved people that are going to carry out your wishes, so you could pass off in the afterlife. You could do that in your tomb. Like, that was a legit Chinese thing, which is hardcore, and it was crazy. It's like brutal to think about. But the idea of like, they could have integrated that much history in with just a little bit of dialogue, and then also justified for why he was not relevant for 1,000 years in the rule, but like his legend was still like growing and growing. I don't like, to me, it was such a weird thing, because the presence of his Mandarinness was not relevant for all of Iron Man, except for the idea of like, oh, okay, like, I like the fact that they're like, oh, they wrote it this way. They were they reinforced the whole like Iron Man 3 angle of like having a boogeyman to be afraid of and all that kind of stuff. But then that scene is fundamentally weird to me, because Wenwu's character is like, American girl, what's your name? Like implying like the Chinese name thing, which is very, very important in Chinese culture, but then neglects to put the last name in. It's like, hey, Wen Wu means this. And I'm like, okay, but that's why the Chinese put our last names first, is because it's tying it to the family history.
Mhm.
And fundamentally that scene failed to recognize that. It's like, yeah, like, our names link us to our ancestry. I'm like, okay, you just gave your given name, you didn't give your family name, and the family name's what ties you to the family history. So to me, that was like, okay, that was stupid, that was really, really weird. But like, so many things about what Wenwu does is crazy good. Like, I love his character. I would watch it again exclusively for him, and that's it. And the love that him and his wife had, like that love scene in that fight, absolutely gorgeous. I thought it was one of the best things about this
Mhm.
whole movie, was how they fell in love. That scene, I was like, this is amazing. This is like classic Chinese cinematography, and they did it really, really well. Like, in the first act of the movie, there was so many bits of like, here's this part of here's like this part of China, here's this interpretation of this, here's this interpretation of this like style of movie making, but then it just kind of gets contained all within that first act, I feel, because the second act has to go to modern day Moon and then just whatever. But like to me, Wen Wu's character, that's how I feel about it. He's really, really well written from a character standpoint, but the backstory makes very little sense to me. Why is he not more prevalent within the MCU up until then? If he's had 1,000 years dominance with the 10 rings, and it's just
where would
really
you see
relevant.
him? I mean, I feel like his legacy is the 10 rings, not what we saw in Iron Man 3, but all the stuff we saw built up before that. That's the legacy. Yeah. And
it is.
Again, when they're showing his backstory, they're not. I see him toppling other countries like figureheads, but it never looked to me like, and then he becomes the figurehead of that civilization or that country. It's just he's amassing power and then he just keeps going, and until he meets Shang-Chi's mother, and then he stops doing that, which was in the 90s. So I don't like other
1996. That's a very important year.
96.
Yeah, because that was the year.
Stops in 96, and then in terms of history of MCU, I don't know that there's room for me to believe he doesn't have any influence. It's just because he's not the Mandarin as such in the comics. I don't think he ever claims being Mandarin. That's just an insult that happened when a white guy tried to appropriate that stuff. I think my issue is that MCU doesn't really deal in. It takes things that happen in history, but they don't connect it to like it's not like Winston Churchill or even the American president of the time is in Captain America: First Avenger, which is one specific it's a specific period piece. It's all made up characters there, right?
I 100% agree.
So you can't really be like, I'm not saying this in relation to Wenwu and how he shouldn't have been connected to a real thing, but what I'm saying is, again, when I'm looking at this as an MCU thing, the last episode that was Iron Man 2, where we had a big chunk on how this isn't cinema as people know it, right? Like this isn't going to be that. This is their own thing. They do their own thing. It doesn't work for everyone. Obviously, this movie didn't work for you. That's fine. But what I'm saying is, as part of that, I can't get too caught up in the historic accuracy, and it's not even about accuracy. It's quite clear. They take historic things that happen and then insert their characters into it.
Yes.
And so for me, I don't know that he didn't have any effect on anything that happened before this. It just hasn't come up yet. Like it's just no one's talked about it because no one had a name to associate it with, other than 10 Rings, who were doing things in the shadows up until I think they kind of gave up. I can't think they kind of gave up on that in Ant-Man. I think that was the last time they made a point of showing you a 10 Rings tattoo on somebody trying to get something done. But yeah, I don't know that it's like, oh, he just gave up, or sorry, he has no effect anymore.
But I mean, okay, so here's the part that bothers me. Okay, about really, really genuinely about this. He meets his wife, gets married, gives up his life of crime. How many criminals of that many big organizations could be like, I'm retiring, I'm taking my 401k, stepping aside? How many gangsters can do that? How many?
Yeah, that's not the same thing, because a criminal knows that they got like 80 years to live, 90.
Sure.
Maybe
he's got thousands.
Could die any day.
Yeah.
So he's not thinking about it the way you're thinking about it. He could take 100 years off and just enjoy this and then come right back to it. He doesn't have to think about, gotta do this right now. I can't give up. Like he can take that time off if he doesn't think he's ever gonna die.
I get that. He can, but how many criminal organizations are okay with that? Like how many? Like
I don't understand your question.
Okay, if the CEO quits, did he point someone else in charge? Did he? Okay, you take over the
what
10
I
rings.
saw. That's what I see in the movie, is that they just kept going, but they were directionless because they didn't have him forcing. But it's not like 10 Rings ceased to exist.
It literally ceased to exist to me. It seemed like it.
I mean, to you, but
maybe that I need to rewatch it. And
I don't think it ceased to exist. I think he stopped being ahead of it.
Okay, fair enough. But
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
okay.
I don't really get I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I
Hmm.
don't get it. So maybe I'm not addressing what you're getting at.
No, to me, it just seems like if you have a criminal organization that big, it's still a big prominent figure throughout everything, right? It can't just go away just because a guy's like, hey, I'm getting married now. You
But
can't.
that's I think that's in the movie. Like it didn't go away. They probably did get reckless, and that's why the Iron
Mhm.
Gang comes and takes out his wife because he's not there to actually direct how things operate.
Fair,
I don't think it
maybe.
just
I don't know.
stopped.
Yep,
I don't. That's not the sense I get from the movie that it just stopped.
fair.
It's not the sense I get having seen other MCU
Mhm.
movies. I
Right.
think what is confusing is that if you try to attach it to the Ben Kingsley character, Trevor Slattery,
Mhm.
as being Ten Rings, as opposed to that nuance that he never was a part of the Ten Rings, they were just
Oh
using
no,
that as a
he was a
copycat.
jester. Yeah, he was just a
No, no,
jester the
what I mean
entire
is the
time.
whole thing, like
Mhm.
Aldrin, like Killian
Yeah.
or whatever, like all of that was never associated with Ten Rings.
Oh, it was
But
never
it,
genuinely
yeah,
associated with it.
yes.
Yeah, they just like literally appropriated it. They
Hmm.
literally appropriated it, and yeah, a complete okay. Um, that okay, that makes a little bit more sense to me because I was just like, my biggest thing was like, how did the Ten Rings just go away? And what you said, and like if there's because you watched it twice, and so I believe you when you're like, hey, it just was directionless. I'm like, okay, sure,
Yeah,
I can deal with that a little bit better.
I shouldn't say it this way, but
Mhm.
for his purposes, no, he shouldn't have stepped away. But because
That's
he
what I'm
stepped away,
saying.
but no, but again, that turns into harnessing your passion, right? So he
Hmm.
harnessed his passion to do the Ten Ring stuff,
Love. Yep.
and then he had a passion for. I feel bad. Can you look up the character name for
Fallout
what?
Chen.
Okay, so that's
That's the
Shang-Chi.
actor. At the
Uh,
actor. Yeah.
no, the character name for Shang-Chi's mom, if you could look that up. I think
Yeah. I'll do that for
that's
sure.
him harnessing something for good. He found love. It's why I like what mirrors with Shang-Chi and Katie is that
Mhm.
he found someone, and if we're talking about duality and like, and I don't really want to get into that because I'm probably going to fumble it, but he found someone to like balance that energy with,
Mm.
and they created two great things. They created
Mhm.
Shang-Chi and his sister,
Yeah.
and that was that passion harnessed for something good. And then
Mhm.
when he loses his wife, he then redirects again, and he's still
Mhm.
harnessing his passion, but it is for something bad, and that's why that character works so well for me.
Yeah.
Again, I think most characters throughout the most meaningful characters in the movie, characters who have more than like one scene, are showing you how harnessing your power, like your
Mhm.
passion, can be good or bad, and it's those are the choices you're making,
Mhm.
right? And I
Mhm.
that's what I like about it is that when he did step down, he paid a price, obviously, but
Yeah.
he was doing the right thing as a
Mhm.
human, which is, oh, I don't like all that power won't mean anything. I am creating life. I am creating this family. And that's not for everybody. I'm not saying, hey, you're not
Yes.
doing it right unless you have
Mhm.
a kid. But he
Right.
did find peace in that, is my point.
Yes.
So for the purpose
Um.
of, I'm not trying to make
Yeah.
that a universal thing.
Mhm.
It's just in that moment, you see when he finds the love with with who becomes his wife during that fight.
Right.
But how much that's sustained throughout the happy montage they show you with them like playing video games together with their kids and stuff like that.
Playing
That is,
DDR, which I will
that
speak to in a
is
little bit.
but that is what he was looking for, obviously.
Yep.
That's what he was looking like. It wasn't toppling civilization or like the
Mhm.
heads of civilizations and collecting money. It was
Mhm.
that's what he was looking for. He found it. And
Mhm.
then obviously he loses it, and he loses sight of what that was for
Mhm.
this movie, because we also had the conversation about how he was like, oh yeah, he just wants to put his family back together. And I don't agree with that, but I understand that that's one of the good things about it. The same way people think, oh no, Thanos just wanted to, thin the herd a bit so everyone it's like, well, no, that's he's got an idea in his head and he's going to go through with it no matter what, but it's
Mhm.
not necessarily the right thing to do, because you still
Yes.
have your kids who still embody your wife. You still can have your family without tearing
Correct.
down this wall. And having seen the movie a second time, it seems like, yes, that's what's calling to him, but he
Mhm.
is also making a point of being like, and then we can burn that village to the ground. So it is the
Yep.
blood oath thing that he's talking like.
Yes.
It's all the negative stuff that he was doing before that's
Mhm.
actually in play at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. The character's name is Lee,
Okay.
by the way. Yeah, all that stuff definitely worked for me. And I think they played up the love for Lee and Wenwu really, really well because to me, there's this nuanced thing during that fight that I thought was amazing. Was that this is a guy we're looking at when from Wenwu's perspective, he's dominated for 1,000 years. Like he's got rule, he's got everything, he's got power stretched across the land, he's toppled empires, whatever controls whatever. He's now looking for an equal or someone that he can respect, right? Because he can't respect anything because it topples too easily. But this is the first time anything or anyone has met his match, but not beaten him to the degree where he thinks he would be beaten. He just like beaten him and just she showed him like, hey, I could just this is nothing to me. Wing Chun is nothing against Tai Chi because Tai Chi is going to make you overexert and just make you tired. That's it. The flow of the bite is just this. So that respect and that love and that growth there, that to me was so genuine and so nuanced and good from a perspective of, yeah, how would someone that powerful look at love at that point in time? If he could have anything he wants, anyone he wants. And from that perspective, that was done so well. The whole love story that developed out of that, the normal family thing, I genuinely enjoyed that. I really, really did, except for the parts that were maybe a little bit more inconsistent than others. Like, so we know that it was 96 that they give up. And the reason why 96 is such an important year is because this to me felt like the MCU was, from a meta perspective, being like bowing down to China in the sense where 96 is the year that Hong Kong got given back to China. So
Mhm.
to me, it's just like there was like 96 was the year that he retired. I'm like, oh, okay, I see what you did there. You're putting that colonization kind of thing, like back to China thing. I get what you did there. I thought that was kind of a thing, a small little detail that I don't think a lot of people would have picked up on. But then they're like immediately the next scene they're playing DDR. I'm like, um, DDR was released in 1998 in arcades only. So the home version came out in 2000. So was there a huge amount of advancement during that time, or are we just like blurring the lines between whatever happened? Because in the sense where, like, if we're looking at period pieces like Captain Marvel, all the technology, all the thing that was era appropriate. It made sense to whatever point in time that was. It like that was just like one of those situations. I'm like, oh, that was a small detail that kind of sucked to see. But it made that audience happy to see them play DDR as a family. So I was like, all right, I'm just like, yeah, one of those things. Whatever. But
Okay.
I love that story. I love that love story between Lee and Wenwu. It is
Yeah,
beautiful.
it's great.
It's
I really
absolutely
liked
beautiful.
Lee and just as on her own.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciated all of that. Um, yeah, Trevor Slattery's back. He gets some laughs.
Yep.
Um,
Here's the thing I want to point out too. It really bothered me that all the jokes and all the comedy beats were at the expense of Sean or Simu Liu's character Shang-Chi. And this, like every single thing was like, oh, the audience is laughing because we're interrupting him in the middle of his own story. That's rude. This is a really rude interaction. This is really, really shitty. This is like every single beat was like, wait a minute, that didn't make sense. How did Trevor Slattery get into the front seat? Like that was just a weird thing. And he's like, oh, I get motion sick. And I'm like, oh, okay. This is just a weird thing. I'm like, everything comes at the expense of him. And I'm like, ugh, that sucked a little bit. That's just a small little
I
detail I
see
noticed.
that. I definitely see that. A lot. Well, specifically making fun of his name change.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that the joke is on Shang-Chi when he gets interrupted by the stewardess. The joke is on the stewardess. The and the meta commentary there is white people's insertion and interrupting.
Boom. Yes.
Um, and I think as that scene plays out, it's most definitely just making fun of her and her
Mm.
idiotic, like, oh well, no, well, I have to be a part of this too. And do you
Mm,
want the beef or the vegetarian? And like she needs to keep going. She needs to have a final. That I don't think that scene is at the expense of Sean. He
mm,
gets Shang. I don't want to call him Sean, but like it was Shang-Chi. He is interrupted, but I still think that overall that scene is, or how that plays out, even the fact that she interrupts,
mhm,
that's on her. And I think, I mean, you could see the car seat as at his expense, but it's
mm.
more just like, again, and I know Ben Kingsley is half Indian, so he's still part of the Asian diaspora, but like
Yes.
it is still that insertion, and I don't think that's specifically at the expense of Shang-Chi.
Mhm,
Um I still think that's still continuing that commentary.
mhm. But it just to me it everything felt like it was at the expense of Shang-Chi in this. Like, but I can see what you're meaning by the airline stewardess thing. But yeah, I'm glad you're like you pointed that out, that the white insertion of everything, and like, hey, this narrative has to be about me now, and you have to make a choice even though I'm not giving you a choice. It's fucking
Yeah,
weird.
or the fact that it's like, hey, can you please like take into consideration my comfort right now as I sit in the
Mm-hmm.
front instead of. I still think that's part of the dialogue, and the not dialogue of the
Mm-hmm.
movie, but like a dialogue that we've been having outside of this movie and for the
Yes.
last couple of years.
Yep.
I didn't see that as, yes, there's window dressing of it being funny, but I still think it is commentary.
Yes,
And
I
I
agree.
so it didn't feel like our hero was losing out so much as experiencing what many people of color like us feel on a
Mm.
day-to-day basis.
See, and maybe this is because, and maybe you're all, and I'd like to hope that after all these years of podcasting together, you have been right rubbing off on me, but in the sense where the audience reaction at that point was just like, oh, that's how you took that joke.
Well, yeah, that's the Dave
That was
Chappelle
upsetting to
effect,
me.
right? Like you
Yeah, it is the
you
Dave
you
Chappelle
put
effect.
you put your art out there and then people decide like it's just
Mhm.
funny he's saying nigger, or it's just funny because haha,
No,
like he got interrupted. But I
Mhm.
don't think that that takes away for me as the viewer, and I
Right.
can only obviously speak for myself. It didn't take away for me what
Mhm.
was on display there. It
Right.
is a nice detail that makes it different than the white led
Yes.
stories, that
Yes.
we are constantly put in a position of
Hmm.
making others feel comfortable with,
Correct.
and even in how we take up space narratively
Hmm.
as to let alone physically, which obviously happens with
Hmm.
Trevor, but as we try to tell our stories, how we get cut off or how we have to
Hmm.
shift gears. I do think that that was part of it.
I absolutely agree. And if that's what they were going for, amazing. But to me, it was one of those things where, and this is why I had to say it on the podcast, because like there's a lot of people going to be listening, and I don't want to repeat this conversation over and over and over again because it's just going to drive me insane. But like that is such a key pivotal point of being a person of color. That's just like, yeah, even when we're doing our thing, we're going to get interrupted because it doesn't fit someone else's narrative.
Mhm.
That we have to make our comfort um, a lesser priority to other people.
Yeah, like it's not time for this now. It's time for me
Yeah,
to do my thing and tell
yeah,
you that you only have the one option, but like I'm gonna talk it up and take up space now.
exactly. And it's just like I wish, I really hope people see that from the lens that I saw that at, because I was like, that to me, and granted, I see why on surface that would be funny to an audience, but once people dig deeper, I hope they realize that something deeper is being said there, and that they need to pay attention to that. Because like the moment I like broke that apart for someone of like why that was so problematic for me, if that, you know, the whole, like certain people within the audience, and when I went to watch this, it was a very interesting mix of half Asian and half white.
Hmm.
I could clearly know it's the white audience that's laughing way too hard at that moment. And you're like, oh, you missed the point here. And all the Asians were just like, just nodding along. I'm like, yep, that's what it's like to be us. That's what it's like to be us. And it's just like, that's it. That's a shitty thing that it just went. That was such an important thing that was said, and it just went over everyone's head.
Yeah.
So I'm like, wanted to talk about it here, that they did that part really, really well. I also like the fact, even though they didn't dig deeper on this, the fact that he chose his name as Sean instead of Shang. That it's just this one thing about. I wanted to know whether or not his character was more like, hey, I chose Sean to be more whitewashed to fit and assimilate better in, or if he's genuinely ashamed of his Chinese name and wanting an English name, but still trying to bridge his, try to make two camps happy, right? Try to make his Asian
I think
camp
it's the
happy
second
and the
one
white people.
based
Yeah.
on I again I can't speak for like
Yes.
I tried to speak for that what I saw was a love story and the director said something else. I think based on everything we've talked about, it probably is more the second thing you said that that also plays into the duality, right? Like he's trying to have both things. I'm not even saying in a bad way. It's just that is him trying to keep two things
Happy
together at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and that was to me like a really nice little thing that they did, but then they didn't actually get to dig in deeper. It was just Katie's just like, what? Your name is Sean, and you chose the name Sean, and I'm like, yeah, I get why he did that. He's trying to make his Chinese ancestors or that first side of his identity happy and bridge it with his American side, so to speak. I'm like that's something that a lot of Asians struggle with, and it's Sean was a great way of representing that because a lot of Asians like, and this is why like in public school you'll see this a lot. You'll be like the teacher will be like something fa la, and then like, oh, call me Queenie or something like that, and then you're just like, it's a weird position for someone to choose their own English name and have free just like the ability to do whatever. And what they end up choosing is like, okay, are you reflective of your Asian culture, or are you like moving further away from it? And it's a very interesting discussion amongst Asians. Like, why did you choose Jason? That's an example. Or why did you choose Samantha? It's a very interesting thing.
One thing I've heard you say multiple times, and again, this isn't me being like, oh, you shouldn't feel this way. I understand. Is you wish they I guess more like you say got into it more. I read it as really like hammered it home. And the one thing that I like about this movie and stuff like Black Panther is, yeah, there's some stuff that they really hammer home, but there's other stuff that's just for us. And what I like about that is it's cinema that's not dependent on the white gaze. It's not dependent on like, oh, we have to really get into this so that we can teach the white people a lesson about like how they make us feel or what this actually means. It really goes to the whole if you know type mythos. And like, so I think like something like that where like he gets interrupted while he's trying to tell a story, that's an if you know type moment that I like, that it's like that's for us. That's not to like it's not like a message moment. It's just like yeah, like that's life and we just have to keep moving.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying one way is better than the other, but for me, I like that type of stuff where it's not explicitly stated. It's there, and then people that understand it feel seen.
Yes. No, I appreciate that because I did talk to obviously a lot of Asians and a lot of Asian males about this movie and how they felt. And one guy that he's part of my Destiny clan that I raid with, Seven, he said like, I'm an Asian male. I don't need this movie to educate other people what it's like to be an Asian male. Exactly. I just need this movie to tell the story well. And he from his perspective, he's like, it did. And my perspective was, listen, I'm not saying it told the story that it wanted to tell well, but to me, I'm like, it could have been enhanced with more of those moments of if you know, then you know. And I like that a lot, but that was very few and far between because even then the way he was interrupted, please let me know of the dialogue, but I remember distinctly in that theater being like, I didn't even hear I'm sorry. I just heard chicken, like beef or vegetarian.
Yeah, why would he apologize?
For interrupting.
Yeah, but no, that's not the point of the that's not the point
No,
of
no,
the
no, no.
sequel.
I know, but like I can't remember if that was done or not.
Oh,
So
if
that
you're,
to me adds
I
to
don't
that.
think so. I
Yeah.
think it's just
She
her
just says,
inserting
yeah,
herself.
yeah.
But yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
I see what you're saying. You're
yeah,
saying you don't know, like, because I think we're both agreeing that if she did say sorry, that would kind of muddy the waters on what they
it
were trying to
does.
accomplish.
Yes.
But I don't think she did. But yeah,
Mhm,
I think yeah, I this is what I wanted to set up at up top, right? That there's
mhm.
multiple ways of um
Appreciating this movie.
not just this movie, but
Mhm,
just, and I'm trying to pick my words not carefully, but very pointedly here.
mhm,
In a world where it seems, or it's tried to be pushed that white is the default, so
yes.
then i- we do feel that hunger to be seen on screen. We do feel like, and when I say we,
Mhm,
you as a Chinese Canadian, as a
mhm,
black from Guyana
mhm,
Canadian, what the that hunger to be seen on screen. And so a lot gets put onto these movies in terms of how
mhm,
they need to play out. Because I
mhm,
definitely went into Black Panther being like, oh, I'm gonna hate this. Yeah. Um, I went into this being like, oh, I'm gonna hate Black Panther, but they did enough that made me be like, oh, that's okay. And
mhm.
then you went into it and that didn't happen for you. That's fair
Yeah.
enough. But I do think that there still needs to be room to like allow for other people, like the person in your rating clan, to be like, this did what it needed to do for me,
Mhm,
and not have them feel alienated for not feeling the way, or you not
mhm,
feel alienated for not feeling the way he did.
mhm.
um because it's going to be about quantity that leads to quality instead of just knocking out a home run every time.
I agree. I agree. We have to make multiple swings, but this is my point, and this is my point on my Facebook post. Was this a genuine attempt? We don't know. Now, now I'm looking at data that's slightly different, which is interesting to point out. But at the time of my post, which is like probably a week before the movie was released to the general audience, it was probably screened already. But my biggest concerns was this movie was set up to fail. Ultimately, in the sense where this was being the way the release was handled. They were like, hard, no, this has to be in theaters only, while the fourth wave's kicking up high numbers in different like areas of the world all over the place, different numbers, different mandates, and all that kind of stuff, right? So they're like, oh, this has to be theater wide, when they've gone on record saying, hey, we're open to Eternals being on Disney Plus if needed be. So I'm like, okay, that's weird that they would do that. When Eternals is coming like basically 5 to 6 weeks after Shang-Chi. They released it on the worst box office weekend, traditionally speaking, Labor Day weekend. The previous box office whole title holder was like Halloween by Rob Zombie, and that made like 30.5 million. So it was like, okay, were they setting the bar low for this movie to break a record, or did they just not believe in this movie? I can't genuinely tell. Every movie from Marvel prior to its release had its budget released, and like as a point of advertisement or a point of pride or something like that. The movie, this was not, it was not released here. Don't know why, but now I have information saying like, oh, Wikipedia says it's 150 to 200 million dollars was the budget, production budget, and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if that considered also advertisement and all that kind of stuff, which falls in line with Black Widow. So it wasn't like the production team and this whole production was shortchanged and all that kind of stuff. And they genuinely picked like good actors to do the roles that they wanted to do. But my issue with it is that this movie was just, it seemed to me, it didn't matter whether or not it would have been successful versus other movies.
So
Was just
one
definitely, we were like, we got to make this successful and all this kind of stuff, and it showed that the level of effort put into it.
so one thing I would say that I think might be a point of confusion, not just for you but for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
is the decision to go theater only versus
Mm-hmm.
on Disney Plus. Um, Going Disney Plus shows a lack of confidence. That
Mm-hmm.
that's just it. They're like, you can read anything, even with HBO Max, all of their movies that went day and date suffered. All like, and so did Black Widow. Like everything that, because more important than what the studio is making, it's everyone else that was involved, what they make. Once you decide to just stick it on streaming, that's less money to go around for everyone else. So to push it to theaters, you say that's a bad weekend. I always thought, or maybe it's July 4th. I always thought that was Will Smith's weekend, so I didn't think that was like a historically bad weekend. But yeah, to put it out just theaters, obviously it worked. I think that was them being like, people will come to see this, because it means people get paid the way they need to, because it's not in the contract when they start, oh, what happens when it's on Disney Plus the same day that it's in theaters. So it means they think they're actually going to be able to pay the people what they need to be paid when you just put it in theaters.
I get that.
So then,
but why say the Eternals, that they're open to the Eternals having that simultaneous release?
I mean, I guess you just don't want to see it, but what I'm saying is, when you say something like that, it shows a lack of trust in your product. So what I'm saying is, when they said, no, we are going to move forward and not put it on Disney Plus, that showed their trust in the product. Yeah. I think we're going to have to try and wrap this up now. So is there any last thing you wanted to say?
Just one last thing before we do. The Wong scene, did that do anything for you or no?
No.
It just felt like a complete distraction, and it just felt like, hey, he's Asian too. Why don't you go in this movie? That's literally what it felt like to me. Because that scene, although allowed a lot of content creators to make a lot of videos about like, what's this? Why is Abomination different now? Like that was a gold mine for them. But to me, I'm like, okay, that didn't even make sense to me. Why he was there, why he was friendly with Abomination, Blonsky, or whatever you want to call him. And it's just like, I don't get it, other than the fact that, oh, okay, I get it. He's Asian, so let's put another Asian in with Asians. And that was it.
I didn't get it, but I'm also like, it's MCU, so I'm sure they'll sort it out.
Yeah, you're right about that. Maybe that'll be more relevant in Young Avengers or whatever is coming down the road, or the Ten Rings kind of thing,
or Doctor Strange too.
Yes,
yeah. So that didn't matter. And then the post credit scenes are Bruce Banner and Captain Marvel are like, hey, these rings, they're calling someone. We don't know who it's calling. But you got to work with Wong now to let's figure this out.
Yeah, I want to see what that's leading up to. Whether or not it's I think it's actually Eternals related. I'm not too sure.
Could be.
I think it's a build up to Eternals more than anything else. But a lot of people are like, "Oh, it's Galactus. It's this." I'm like, okay,
probably Eternals based on the trailer for Eternals, and then Shang-Chi. I forget her name, Xiling or something. I can't remember his sister's name.
Yeah.
She takes over. She takes over as the head of the Ten Rings. Yeah. Pointedly with female combatants now, as opposed to just male.
Yeah. And one important thing, and one of the things I asked too is, I don't know if this is important, but whether or not some of the Black Widows that defected from the Black Widow program are now with Xiling and her camp of people and all that kind of stuff. I think that might be a very interesting thing, because we did see some Black Widow people in this movie in like cutaway scenes and as Easter eggs. So it could, and because we know Madripoor was such a big part of all that kind of stuff, that we know that this could potentially be a thing, and Madripoor being hopefully linked to Macau in some sort of way. But I think the interesting thing to me, the sticking point at the end of the movie, this was like a really weird slap in the face to me, is that at the end of the movie, the 10 rings will return, as opposed to Shang-Chi will return. I'm like, okay, are we saying that there's no Shang-Chi 2? Are we just definitely saying that because the numbers aren't going to be there financially to green light another one, or what are we going to do? But that to me was it didn't even say, how in Endgame it said Thanos will come back, or no, sorry, in Infinity War it said Thanos will come back, and that was such a slap to the face to the audience. Oh my god, you just put us through that much trauma, and now you're being you have to put us through Stockholm syndrome too. But in this situation, it bugged me that it was oh, just the 10 rings, eh? Cool, that's fine, that's cool. Well, I guess we'll see Mulu when we see him again.
Yep, that is a fact.
Yeah,
we'll see him if we see him again.
Yep.
But you're right. Usually they say a character name, not an object name.
Yes.
So
yep. That's
all right. Let's
more thoughts for future episodes to unpack. But right now, I guess we got to rate it.
Yeah.
Yep. You go first.
I'm giving this an 8. I really liked it.
Cool. It's a 5. It's a
Excellent.
5. Yep.
That makes sense.
There's so many things that I wish I like. There's so many more things I could pick on in this movie, but I'm just like, no. Tweet at us. Let me know. Engage in dialogue with me.
Excellent.
Yeah. How can they do that?
Well, yeah. Thank you very much for listening. We're part of the That Shelf Podcast Network. That means we're on the same network as great shows like Bad Gay Movies, Black Hole Films, Changing Reels, Composers, a whole bunch of things. So please head on over there. That's thatshelf.com. You'll find those podcasts. You'll find our podcast. If you want to hear older episodes of our podcast, please go to spoiledrotten.com. Or no, don't go there. Go to tdfeverything.com/spoiledrotten. You'll find older episodes of Spoiled Rotten. We are at TDF Spoiled on Twitter. Our email is spoiledpodcast@gmail.com. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Radio Public, whole bunch of places. So if you don't see us where you usually get your podcast, let us know. Ben said tweet at us. You can email us. Go for it. And please rate, review, share with your friends. Oh, also subscribe. That would be lovely. Yeah. And as I said, if everything goes right, the next episode will be Let There Be Carnage. But if not, we will be continuing our revisiting of MCU movies.
That's right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
This has been a TDF Everything production, brah.